What if your inability to think clearly has very little to do with time management? You can color code your calendar, delegate your tasks, optimize your morning routine, and still make a poor decision at 3 in the afternoon. Why? Because the executive brain does not run on time alone. It runs on capacity. And when that capacity is consumed by unresolved decisions, constant interruptions, emotional regulation, competing priorities, and the pressure to remain available, strategic clarity becomes biologically harder to access. Today, I want to challenge one of the most common assumptions in leadership development. The problem is not always that executives need to become more productive. Sometimes the problem is that organizations are demanding high quality judgment from a brain it has never allowed to recover. Welcome to Longevity Unlocked, the podcast where we examine the physiological systems behind leadership, strategic clarity, and long term executive performance. I'm Nurse Sherrie, executive longevity and high performance strategist. After nearly 3 decades in critical care environment, I understand that performance can look stable on the outside while the systems supporting it are quietly becoming depleted. This month, we're examining cognitive load and strategic clarity, not as productivity concerns, but as executive longevity concerns. Because your organization does not merely need your time, it needs access to your best judgment. Okay, you're probably wondering, what is cognitive load? Let's get into it. Cognitive load is the total mental demand being placed on the brain's limited processing capacity, particularly working memory and executive function. For an executive, that load may include evaluating competing priorities, holding unfinished decisions in their physical mind, switching between operational and strategic issues, regulating emotions during conflict, anticipating downstream consequences, filtering constant information, remembering commitments that have been captured, and carrying concerns that cannot yet be discussed. Here's a contrarian thought. Cognitive load is not simply having too much to do, because two executives can have the same number of meetings and experience entirely different levels of cognitive load. The greater burden often comes from ambiguity, interruption, unresolved decisions, emotional pressure, and the need to repeatedly change mental context. A full schedule is visible, but an overloaded brain, it's not often visible. And that distinction matters because most leadership advice attempts to fix the visible schedule while ignoring the invisible physiological burden. Sherrie, what is strategic clarity? I'm glad you asked. Strategic clarity is not merely knowing the company's goals, it is the capacity to separate signal from noise. Identify what matters most and recognize patterns. Anticipate consequences, tolerate short term uncertainty, resist emotionally driven urgency, make decisions consistent with long term priorities. Let's think about something for a minute. Strategic clarity is often described as leadership competency, but clarity is not only a skill, it is also a physiological state. You may possess excellent judgment and still have reduced access to it when your working memory is overloaded, or your stress response is elevated, or your recovery is inadequate. You have not suddenly become less intelligent. Your brain has fewer available resources which to apply your intelligence. The wisdom may still be present, but access to that wisdom has become impaired. And see, we want to treat our brain like a computer, and we kind of call it the computer, and we have movies about human computers and all of that, but our brains are finite materials. So if the physiological foundation is insecure, that computer is not functioning. So it's like you trying to have your brain function on 2026 upgrades, but you're really running on 1990 dial-up bandwidth. Let's discuss what happens in the executive brain. Executive function includes working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. And these systems help leaders They help the leaders hold information long enough to evaluate it, resist impulsive or emotionally appealing responses, because the brain will always default to familiarity. We got to remember that. And shift perspectives when new information emerges. We got to pause before acting. When I tell you there's so much power in that pause, it is. I have learned to do that, to pause. And and I've learned this from the ICU. This has become my mantra. We have a thing where everybody knows, whether you're medical or not, what code blue is. Code blue means that the heart is stopped, you stop breathing, and now life-saving measures need to be instituted immediately. If a situation has not occurred where we need to call a code blue, I'm pausing. You're not going to get a rush out of me. I'm going to pause and then decide if I need to just make a pivot or if I need to watch the situation a little bit closely. So, pausing before acting, you can help connect today's choice to tomorrow's consequences. When cognitive load remains high, the executive brain becomes more likely to default to familiar solutions because, like I said, the brain is going to always default to familiarity. It defaults to patterns. So that's why it's important to have closed loops and not leave open loops. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Narrow its field of attention, overvalue urgency, become less cognitively flexible, react instead of reflect. And that's the purpose of the pause. You need the pause so that you can reflect first before reacting. Avoid or delay complex decisions and make decisions simply to relieve mental pressure. Because a lot of times it's like, oh, I got to make a decision. Okay, let's just go with this. But you're not really pausing. You're not really reflecting. Research on executive function identifies working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility as core capacities supporting reasoning and adaptive behavior. Research also suggests that acute stress can impair these functions, particularly working memory and cognitive flexibility. Here's a contrarian thought. What appears to be decisiveness may sometimes be cognitive escape. Like I said, they're not really making a decision because they're sure. They're just making a decision because one needs to be made. And the executive is not nearly choosing because the answer is clear. There are a lot of times they're carrying unresolved decision that has become intolerable. Research has shown that task switching also has a cognitive cost. I've learned that in real time. So now what I try to do is just have my task. Gone are the days of multitasking. I used to think, oh, I'm the best multitasker ever. But it goes back to the saying that jack of all trades, master of none. That's what constant task switching does to you. You're going to be the jack of all trades, but you're not mastering anything. Each time a leader moves from a financial decision to a personal conflict, then to a notification, then back to strategy, the brain must disengage one set of rules and reactivate another. And the cost of a single switch may appear small, but the accumulated cost across an executive day is not. This is why reducing cognitive load does not mean making leaders less responsible. It means protecting the neural resources required to carry responsibility well. And this is something I had to learn, unfortunately, the hard way. That's why, I have a task now. Right now, I'm doing content creation. When I'm done with content creation, I go for a walk. Even if it's 10 minutes, I go for a walk or I take white space. I specifically do that. And if there's any open loops, like say there's some unfinished things that I need to take care of, I'll set a time on the calendar or say, okay, well, I needed to create this, but I can't do that now. So that'll be on the calendar for tomorrow at 3 p.m. That way the loop is closed. And that way I'm not carrying it in my mind as cognitive residue. So in real life, And this has been me, the high functioning overload pattern. And that's why I said I've instituted a lot of these things too, because a lot of these case studies and executives that I worked with, I've also seen these studies in myself. They usually say that a lot of times you invent something or become something because of an unmet need that you have in your personal life. So what really intrigued me about executive longevity was when I decided to move into the leadership space, move into the consultancy space, that I realized, oh, this is me. Oh, I am she. I need my help. So that does a lot. And I've realized that the task switching was one of them. And I had a lot of high functioning overload. Because high achievers, we do. We just highly function. We put everything on our plate. We're going to hustle. This hustle culture tells us that we need to thug it out until we die. So a lot of executives, a lot of high achievers, they function in overload, and they have a lot of overload patterns that they function in without even realizing that's what it is. So I want you to picture an executive who begins their day with the strategic priority. Before 10 a.m., she's answered messages, resolved a staffing concern, reviewed financial projections, approved a proposal, navigated emotionally charged conversation. She still attends the strategy meeting, sounds articulate, and appears composed. But internally, her working memory is holding pieces of every precious interaction. By the time the most important decision reaches her, she is not evaluating it with the same brain state she had at the beginning of the day. And here's a thought: the meeting may be scheduled according to everyone's availability while being completely misaligned with the executive's cognitive availability. Organizations protect conference room availability more consistently than they protect decision capacity. And that's an operational flaw, not a personal weakness. And this is why I say you have to be in control of your calendar. And if you have a personal assistant or a VA or whomever that is in control of your calendar, you need to let them know what the calendar, you need to have autonomy over the calendar setup. I know for me, strategic decision making occurs first thing in the morning. I am no good later in the day. I'm not going to be handling what I call admin problems, staffing issues, those kind of things. I'm not making those decisions later in the day. If I do, I specifically will plan a strategic nap, because that works best for me. I'm noticing I've tried a few things and strategic naps work for me. I love sleep anyway, so it's just one good reason to get a nap in. So I will have a strategic short nap, but I prefer 90% of the time I will make my strategic decisions early in the morning. You're not getting anything out of me in the evening. I want to do automated tasks only. I don't want to be thinking about major decisions first thing in the morning. So let's talk about the decisive CEO. And this is a composite study too. And this CEO developed a reputation for making decisions quickly. The organization praised his decisiveness, but many of his afternoon decisions were later reversed. Why? Because the initial assumption was that the team was not presenting enough information, but the actual pattern was different. His mornings were filled with back-to-back operational interruptions. By the afternoon, he was making decisions quickly because he no longer had the cognitive bandwidth to tolerate complexity. That is me. That's why I see a lot of myself in a lot of these case studies. I was the case study. A lot of executives, I am she and he and everybody else. We all are one, because I see this a lot in myself. The intervention was not another decision-making framework, because that's the first thing we default to. Let me get a new framework. And I'm bad for that. Now it's usually, let me tweak my systems. And even with that, I start looking at why the system is breaking down to begin with. Or let's get another productivity app. Or let's do another hack. What ended up happening was high stakes decisions were moved into protected morning windows. I always talk about that in my signal framework. In non-negotiable thinking times, we have to protect those decision windows. Operational concerns were consolidated into scheduled reviews. Because we got to remember, everything is not an emergency and everything does not need our immediate attention. And that's why I've taken a lot of the skills that I've learned in critical care and brought them into the leadership realm. If it is not a code blue, if I don't see symptoms declining rapidly that's going to lead to a catastrophic or event, I pause first. It gets scheduled. A lot of things that we consider emergencies are not emergencies, or they're not emergencies of our own doing, or we want to handle everything because as overachievers, we want to, especially women, we want to put an S on our chest and carry everything on our back, and it's not for us to carry. Stop being the bottleneck in your day. Stop being a bottleneck in your organization. This is why you have assistants, other senior leaders to carry that load. Let them schedule some of those reviews and allow them to handle it, and then let them give you the quick notes, the cliff notes about it. But you don't need to handle everything. Non-urgent questions stopped arriving through multiple channels. Everybody doesn't need to report to the top. That's why they have middle management. People always talk about middle management. Middle management is necessary. The CEO doesn't need to be answering every question. Everybody doesn't need to be running to the CEO. Everyone doesn't need an audience with the C-suite. That is the purpose of middle management. Let them handle that. And we have to be good with them handling at 70% good. Their 100% needs to become our 70% good. And we need to not interrupt that, because everybody's not going to do everything the way we want it to be done. So if you don't want to become the bottleneck, if you don't want to be carrying all this cognitive load, which impairs your strategic clarity, you want to make sure you delegate. So once we went ahead and operational concerns were consolidated into scheduled reviews, non-urgent questions stopped arriving through multiple channels, the result was not merely fewer interruptions, it was fewer reversals, clearer communication, and more consistent judgment. He did not need to become more decisive. He needed to stop spending his best cognitive capacity before his most consequential decisions. Let's talk about the leader who couldn't turn it off. There was a senior leader and she could never stop thinking about work. She assumed she lacked boundaries, and she did, but that's not the major thing. That's the first thing we want to default to, but that's not always the major thing. But her brain was carrying dozens of unfinished loops, decisions with no next step, commitments stored only in memory, ambiguous ownership, and issues she feared would be forgotten if she stopped rehearsing them. Her inability to disengage was not simply a discipline problem. Her brain did not trust that the work had been captured. She began using a structured cognitive offloading practice. Capture the open loop. That's what I just said. Because my brain is always hunting for things. So if I don't close loops, trust and believe it's going to be running around that track in circles. So I am big for now closing loops. This is what I have to do for the day. And it's going in this block. And when this block is done, that is it. The next block will be this day at this time. Assign ownership. Like I said, as a CEO founder in your company, and I know when you first start, because the same thing with me, you're everything. You're the CEO, you're HR, you're the administrative assistant, you're the marketing person, you're always sales when you have a business, but you're everything. You're wearing every hat. But once you get a team, start assigning some ownership. I have a team now, and I give them protocols and SOPs, and after they get everything together, I just look over it really quick and just say, okay, this is good to go, instead of doing everything myself. And like I said, I establish it, I close the loop and put it on my calendar so I can go back to it. So establish when it'll be revisited. And that process does not eliminate the responsibility, but it allows your brain to stop using constant mental rehearsal as a reminder system. This is the purpose of the calendar, not your brain, not just storing it in the mental confines, in the mental file cabinet of your brain, where you're constantly opening and closing the drawer, picking it up, putting it down, picking it up, putting it down. It's like when people say, oh gosh, I want God to answer my prayer. And no sooner we pray, we take it back and try to handle it ourselves. Instead of focusing on the desired result, We want to handle the how. We want to tell God how to do it. Oh, God, handle this situation for me. But let me tell you what I want you to do it. No, 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 no. You pray and let it go. You put it on your calendar and let it go. Here's a contrarian thought. Sometimes a leader who cannot disconnect does not need another lecture about boundaries. They need a system their brain trusts. And that's what I needed to do. You still need boundaries. Let's make that personally clear. But it's not just because you're lacking boundaries. You don't have a system in place, but you do need boundaries. When you have a system in place, it actually automatically institute those boundaries for you. So you don't have to worry about, iron fisting a boundary or worrying about having an iron fist a boundary because it's there. It's there. I'm going to give you 5 strategies to mitigate cognitive load. Number 1, audit decision density, not just meeting density. Do not only ask, how many meetings do I have? Ask, how many decisions will these meetings require? That's what I said. I prioritize what's urgent, what's not, because every meeting is not important. Sometimes I go to some of these meetings and I'm like, y'all know this could have been an email. Matter of fact, this could have just been a Post-it note. I mean, you could text me. This was not important. I did not have to waste emotional bandwidth on this right here, on mental bandwidth on this conversation. It's a no. How much context switching is involved? If your morning is stacked for capital allocation, you don't need to be worrying about staffing issues in the same time block. Let that be in the evening if you don't need as much mental bandwidth to deal with that. Which conversations require emotional regulation? For me, I am better in the morning. So usually I'm more emotionally regulated in the morning. So those meetings get scheduled first. If you're a night owl and your brain doesn't start really waking up until 3 p.m., that's when you want to schedule those meetings. And preferably after lunch, because no one's emotionally regulated on an empty stomach. I can tell you that now. There's no emotional regulation going on. Where are the irreversible or high consequences decisions? Again, when is your brain the most active, the most rested? Like I said, if I have to make a high stakes decision in the evening, like a matter of fact, I had to do that today. Guess what Sherrie did before that decision? She took an hour nap because I needed my brain to be rested. I needed my emotions to be regulated, especially when we're talking about finances, because that is not my favorite subject to talk about. 2 open hours after 5 demanding decisions may not be true strategic capacity. So you need to realize that. White space on the calendar is not automatically white space in the brain. And that's the purpose of having the closed loops. Yes, I do schedule my white space. Yes, I do schedule my cognitive resets. But I close the loops before I do them, because if I don't, the brain is a hunter. It's going to default to the familiar. So while I'm laying there in my Shavasana pose, so for those who do yoga, you know what that pose is. So while I'm laying in my Shavasana pose and all of a sudden my brain is like, no, mama, we're not, you can Shavasana all you want to. Your body Shavasana, but your brain is still working. My brain is running on the track. We're not doing that. Number 2, protect decision windows. Place high stakes, ambiguous, or irreversible decisions inside the periods when your cognitive capacity is the strongest. I cannot say this enough. When I say just try, if you don't try any other strategy, this is the one to try. As long as you do this, trust and believe, you're going to have so much strategic clarity. You're going to see how much more efficient you are. So I'm going to repeat that because I cannot say that enough. Number 2 is protect decision windows. Place high stakes, ambiguous, or irreversible decisions inside the periods when your cognitive capacity is the strongest. Do not give every decision equal access to your best brain. When I get up in the morning, because I've said in an earlier podcast that my sleep is not always the best. That's still my challenge area, but I work on it every day. If my sleep is not the greatest and I can wake up in my physical body and I feel it, because I don't just go at the data, because sometimes my sleep score is good and my body's like, says who? So I will ask myself, what are the priorities that I have today? And if I have 5 priorities, I pick the top 3, because honestly, when you're tired and you're cognitively depleted, everything on your to-do list, everything on your calendar seems like it's an emergency and it's a must do today, but it is not. So I look at, what can I do today? What deadlines are coming first? And what am I going to prioritize today? And those 5 priorities might jump down to 3. And the other 2 will be placed somewhere else. So my brain is not saying, oh, I gotta get to those 2. I gotta get to those 2. So your peak cognitive window is an organizational asset. You function better because you're making better strategic decisions. So not only is this better for you, it is better for the organization. Treat it like it is. Number 3, externalize unfinished loops. Use one trusted place to capture unresolved decisions, delegated items, follow-ups, concerns requiring later review. Like I said, I have a system in place. So it kind of goes on my calendar. My calendar is color-coded, but it goes on my calendar. And if it's something for the team, it goes straight to the team. If it's something for me, then like I said, I prioritize. What do I have the capacity for today? How many hours do I have in a day to handle this? Because my recovery infrastructure is intentional, because you don't have cognitive capital. That's your brain. That's your decision quality. That is what you're getting paid for. If you neglect your recovery infrastructure. So I don't neglect that. My recovery infrastructure, my quiet time in the morning, my peak cognitive windows, those are non-negotiable for me. My cognitive resets, non-negotiable for me. Everything gets scheduled around that. That's how I'm my most efficient. Ideas do not require immediate action. And sometimes I'll be working and I have an idea about something. I will put it, because Sundays are usually my planning for the weekdays anyway. So I will put that on my schedule for Sunday morning, and I have a time where I go back and I revisit those things, and that's where I put on my calendar. But if it's not immediate, I don't give it immediate action. Again, you have to treat your business and your life like, what's the emergency? If I went to the emergency room, are they going to rush me in the back because I'm having signs and symptoms of a heart attack or a stroke? Or are they going to rush me to the back because I have a hangnail and it's just irritating and it's bothering me? So is this task a hangnail, or is this a heart attack or a stroke? And that's how you have to assign each item. And speaking of that, we're going to assign each item a next step, an owner, or a review date. So if I have something like, a lot of times before my nursing license are due, because I'm licensed in, I think, 44 of the lower 48 states in the country. So licenses for certain states that are not part of the compact are due different months, different times. 3 months prior, I have alerts set on my calendar, because each state requires certain CEUs that must be done in addition to the other ones that you do. And they're on my calendar. Now, if I have something pressing that's due, the deadline is this week, no, I'm not going to go open up that CEU, but at least it's there. And then I can say, okay, that's there. Let me reschedule this for another time, because today I need to take care of this. And I've learned that working in the ICU. You have 2 patients. One may be on the ventilator, requiring lots of medications to keep their heart functioning. They're on the ventilator to help them breathe. They need a lot of medicines to help their organs function. My other patient may be breathing on their own, just have a little nasal cannula in their nose, just giving them oxygen. They can articulate their needs. They can feed themselves. Who is going to get the most attention? Obviously, I'm checking in on my patient who we have on a ventilator, who has several drips going, whose vitals are unstable, who imminently can go into their heart stopping, and they stop breathing, which is code blue. And after I assess them and make sure that they're stable, then I can go to my patient who's sitting up in a chair in a recliner eating their breakfast. And that's how you have to schedule your task, and that's how you have to review your date and review your day. And then in the hospital, we have patient care assistants, or CNAs. If I have alarms in my patient's room that's on the ventilator and alarms going off, or the call bell is going off in my patient who clearly is alert and oriented and pressed the call bell, who am I going to go to first? So I'm going to assign an owner. The CNA can go check on the patient who actually can press his call light because he can make his needs known. And I'm going to attend to the monitor where the alarms are going off to the patient. That's the only way they can make their needs known. That's letting me know something's going on because they cannot make their needs known. So make sure you're assigning tasks and owner, because everything is not up for the owner to do. And then, like I said, review the date. Your brain should process information, not serve as your organization's storage system. Number 4, reduce unnecessary switching. Batch similar decisions. The reason why you want to do that is you want to consolidate your updates and establish office hours for routine approvals. Like I said, the brain carries residue. So if I go from making a financial decision, and then within the same hour, now we're talking about staffing issues. Then in the same hour, I'm answering emails from a client. That all that residue, because there's still open loops, especially if it's not solved in that moment, it's just an accumulation of residue. You also want to create clearer escalation criteria. Like I said, you don't want to be the bottleneck in your company. This is the importance of middle management. You cannot be the employees on the ground. Like I said, you can't be the foot soldiers and the sergeant and the general. You're the general. So let the sergeant be great, and then let the foot soldiers be great. But you can't be all three. Before interrupting a leader, the organization should know, is this truly urgent? Does this require an executive? If you have a system in place, like I said, your system becomes your automatic default boundaries. So they won't be jumping the chain of command. Even in the hospital, we have chains of commands. Now, if it's an emergency, we can jump that, but very rarely do we do that. And only time we do is in a case of an emergency. I work in a lot of teaching hospitals. So you have residents. Usually your first line is your residents. But if I have a patient, and this has happened once or twice, that is what we call crashing, where we know that it's about to be an imminent code blue situation. And I am talking to the residents because these are baby doctors. They're still learning. And I feel like they're not giving me the orders that I need to help this patient not become this situation, become a catastrophic situation. I will bump them and either go to the senior resident, or I will go to the actual doctor that is overseeing them, because this is an emergency. But normally we don't just buck the chain of command. We don't just go straight to the doctor caring for the patient. We go to the resident first. And then you got to ask yourself, what happens if this waits? If it's not an emergency, 9 times out of 10, it can't wait. And then we have to decipher what is an emergency. Even in our personal life, my personal life, My family knows an emergency is if you are sick and or dying. And this probably is going to sound harsh. Don't call me to tell me somebody has already died. I'm not the person to call for that. That's Jesus's job. I'm not Lazarus. I don't have the Lazarus effect. If they're dying, maybe there's something I need to do. Maybe I can get there in time. But if they're already, that could wait. That's not an emergency. It's a sad situation, but it's not an emergency. You didn't budget your finances appropriately. So now you're blowing up my phone because you need funds. Your poor planning is not my emergency. So we have to ask, what happens if it waits? Constant accessibility is not the same as effective leadership. Number 5, make recovery part of decision architecture. Recovery is not only what occurs afterward. It can include, and like I said, I love this. I schedule it. Your recovery infrastructure is non-negotiable. I promise you, once you schedule your recovery inside of your day, you will see how more effective and productive you actually are than this whole thugging it through. They may want to call it soft life business, whatever you want to call it. I love it and I'm all for it. I have put my hustle hat down and it's going to stay down. Now, recovery, it can include brief cognitive resets between demanding meetings. Like I said, I do it between protected decision windows. And cognitive resets could be walking with no music, no podcasts. A lot of times, the first 10 minutes of the morning, I do that to get out in the sun to reset my circadian rhythm and just to decrease the amount of inputs I know that's going to be going on in my head later that day. So that's one thing I do. Like I said, I will create white space. I will just lay down on the floor, close my eyes, have the fan on me, and just be thinking of nothing. I can meditate. I can box breathe. Just depends on what is needed at that time and how regulated or dysregulated my nervous system is. But because I schedule these, it's very rare that my nervous system is dysregulated. And because I am in an extremely busy season, like I said in the last podcast, the next 8 quarters are going to be busy for me. So because of that, it is mandatory for me that I schedule these cognitive resets and strategic pauses, especially before consequential decisions. Especially, I will take a strategic nap. I will walk. I say a prayer. Whatever incantation, if you're spiritual and not religious. And I'm not particularly a religious person, but I do believe in God or your higher power or whomever you ascribe to. That helps me to calm my nervous system and make the best decisions possible. And like I said earlier, definitely walking without consuming more information. And that's why I don't walk with podcasts or anything in, because my brain is like a sponge. So it likes to learn. So I'm not using those cognitive reset times as those times for additional input. Protecting your sleep. Like I said, for me, I don't have anchored sleep times because my schedule is too fluid for that. But I do have anchored routines. When I get up in the morning, I meditate, I pray, I journal. That one hour to 2 hours, depending on what day of the week it is, that's sacred for me. Then I do my 10-minute cognitive reset and I go for a walk. So that's non-negotiable. And like I said, getting out first thing in the morning, that first 10 minutes in the sun sets your circadian rhythm. So as the sun is going down, your body is naturally, the melatonin is going to go up. Your body's going to naturally say, hey, it's time to get ready for bed. And then I have a bedtime routine. I wear my Blu-ray blocker glasses. I turn off the TV 10 minutes before bed. It's lights out, totally black, no noise. I used to sleep to like meditative music and affirmations, but I realize my subconscious is still working in the back. So unless I'm having what I call busy brain and it's just going and it will not stop, then I may do that to run in the background. But normally it's lights out, very dark. So I have very structured bedtime routines, and I rarely deviate from that. Ending unnecessary input, like I said, sometimes we have to be so careful because we are vibrational creatures. So our eyes, our ears, our smells, our five senses are constantly inputting things, and that's how the brain interprets things. So I try not to engage in conversations that are unnecessary, engage in situations that are unnecessary. Now, I still like my reality TV, but I schedule that. And even on social media, everything is scheduled. I rarely doom scroll, but if I do, that's actually scheduled and timed. 15 minutes, then I'm off. Boom. So we want to end unnecessary input and creating periods in which no decisions are required, and that's the white space. Recovery does not compete with performance. Recovery restores access to performance. And I've known this to be so true in my life. Now, let's talk about the executive longevity elevation. Most productivity systems ask, how can I fit more into the day? Not executive longevity. Executive longevity asks, what condition must the leader's brain and body be in to make this decision well and continue making decisions well for years, not quarters, for years, for decades on decades on decades. That's why I said when I wake up in the morning, and I don't care if my sleep score says 91, excellent, but my body feels like, no, it's more like a 51. I ask myself, how am I feeling and what decisions deserve my attention today? What are the priorities? What are the priority deadlines? And that is the distinction. Leadership performance is not sustainable simply because an executive can endure the current pace. Endurance can conceal depletion. The hustle culture, if it hasn't taught us anything, it has taught us that. Because you be looking good on the outside, but breaking down on the inside. And like I said, working almost 3 decades in critical care, I can tell you we see that all the time. Some of our patients don't look like what the inside of their body says that they're going through. So you can continue producing while judgment, patience, adaptability, sleep, metabolic stability, and emotional regulation are quietly deteriorating. The goal is not to help executives tolerate dysfunctional demand for longer. The goal is to design leadership in a way that protects the human system responsible for organizational performance. Strategic clarity is not created by forcing the brain to think harder. It is created by reducing the interference that's preventing the brain from thinking well. As you enter this week, I want you to ask yourself, what is consuming your cognitive capacity without creating strategic value? Now, I don't ask myself this on a weekly basis. I actually ask myself that on a daily basis. And then when I sit down to do my calendar for the week, I ask myself that question again. Which decisions are repeatedly entering my mind because they have not been clarified, assigned, or scheduled? And this is why I clarify and schedule everything. Because if I don't, my mind is just going to be going around in the mental organization cabinet, opening up the file cabinet, closing it back, running around checking it again, because we got to make sure we don't forget anything. So I don't want that to happen. We got to get off the treadmill in our mind. And is my calendar organized around time or around the quality of judgment my role requires? I used to do my schedule around time. And I don't have complete autonomy of my schedule just yet. So there is some time basis, but I also anchor my routines so that I have protected decision windows. Your cognitive overload is not automatically a personal failure. It may be information. It may be revealing unclear ownership, excessive access, unresolved priorities, inadequate recovery, or an organizational structure that depends too heavily on your brain. If you're at work, like I said, there has to be systems in place. Everything cannot come through you. There has to be people that can mitigate some of those tasks and not go behind them and try to be the Superman or Superwoman of the organization. In your personal life, and women, we're guilty for this because most men, they'll let you know. They're going to set these boundaries. I go to work, I come home, this is time for me to chill. I'm de-stressing. My testosterone levels are dropping now. My cortisol is dropping. I'm going to rest. But women, we go to work, we come home, and then we're doing 5 hours of unpaid labor. We're running the kids to soccer practice or helping kids with homework, cooking dinner, cleaning the kitchen, getting the kids to bed, or taking care of an aged parent or an aged loved one. We're doing all the things. And we can't do that. Our brains cannot manage that. We have to have tasks in place. If you have kids that are at least toddler age, let them pick up some of their toys. You don't have to go around and do that. Better yet, hire a maid. Have a nanny come by a couple of days a week and you just go somewhere for a couple of hours to yourself. Or here's a good idea. You have a husband. The marriage is a partnership. You're in the marriage corporation. Delegate some tasks to the other senior partner. It shouldn't all fall on your shoulders. You shouldn't have to be the brains of the organization. I used to think it was so cute when my boyfriend would say, "You're the brains of the organization," to when I realized he abdicated thinking everything fell on my plate. And I was like, nah, I'm not the brains. Nope. We're going to have a system. This is what you do. This is what I do. But I'm not going to be thinking about everything. I'm not making every decision. And I'm not going to be doing everything. So we have to look at that. Because if we're doing everything, how are we recovering? What is the structure like? Do not merely ask yourself if you can handle more. Ask why your leadership system requires you to hold so much in the first place. And I'm talking specifically to my women now, because we were taught to self-sacrifice and to do everything and to be everything and carry an S on our chest. And I used to get gratification from that. And now I realize it was just breaking me down. Now that I have a recovery infrastructure, like I said, once you have systems and structures in place, it automatically has some boundaries in place. So I had to realize I had to treat my personal life like my business life. Like, no, I'm not handling these things, or this is what I will handle. This is where you can fit in the calendar. And this is my time for me, just for me. So if you have to hire a maid, do that, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty about it. If you have to order from a meal delivery service, do that. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about that. That is probably better option than hitting a drive-through and getting a bunch of fast food that has poor nutritional value that you're stuffing down your children's throats and giving them a poor structure of what adequate nutrition should look like. So if you don't have time to cook, no. Get a meal delivery service. Get the maid. Have cognitive reset time. Have a Calgon take me away time. This month, inside the executive longevity community, we are exploring cognitive load and strategic clarity and the systems that protect executive decision quality. If you are ready to stop treating exhaustion as the unavoidable cost of leadership, join us. Together, we are reframing sustainable high performance, not as doing less meaningful work, but as protecting the capacity to do your most consequential work well. And until August 9th, we are still running the Executive Longevity Lab, where we put systems in place so that you can run your best life. So if you're interested, the link will be in the show notes. If you want to see where there are leaks in your energy, in your life, and in your organization, the link below for the executive capacity audit, you'll see that also. And if you're ready to get started on your journey today, then book a strategy call with me. And all those links, like I said, will be below in the show notes. I'm Nurse Sherrie, and this is Longevity Unlocked. Until the next time, remember, your calendar may measure your commitment, but your capacity determines it.